welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Oliver Rochford. I'm a security subject matter expert at Brim, and I'm here to speak to you about how to hunt Emotet malware using Brim and Zeek. Now, there was a recent advisory from the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, warning that a malware called Emotet has resurged in activity recently. Now, it's an old malware. It started out in 2014 as what's called a banking Trojan. And a banking Trojan is really just a piece of software which infects a computer to try to harvest and steal online banking credentials. In the meantime, it's evolved into this sophisticated, what's called a cybercrime as a service offering. And just as it sounds, just like a software as a service kind of solution, it's a platform that anyone can rent, normally based on Bitcoin, and it can be used for a variety of different threat campaigns. So whether you're a nation state, whether you're a fraudster, whether you're some kind of, no matter what criminal, you can really deploy different types of payloads and software once this Emotet has infected a system. So that means you can change it from creating ransomware to harvesting banking credentials. And that makes it very dangerous and very powerful. And while there are some shared components to each attack, of course, it also means that there's quite a lot of variability. We're going to start just by looking a little bit at the background to Emotet itself so that we know what we're going to be looking for, and also at the tools that we're going to be using. Because, of course, it's important to work out how to hunt something before it occurs, we're going to try to use a sample of Emotet. I mean, I'm not expecting you to have been a breach to be able to have live data, so to speak, but thankfully there are some really good folks who make these type of samples available. We're going to be using a sample from Malware Traffic Analysis Net. It was posted quite recently. And if you look at the associated files, we're going to be working with the first sample data set, the Emotet epoch-free infection with TrickBot GTAG. We're also, of course, going to be using Brim. A little bit of a disclaimer, I, of course, work for Brim. And if you haven't come across Brim yet, do take a look. It's open source and it's free. It is the best way, the best solution you're ever going to find to search and explore Zeek data and security data more generally. It's all based on our data format that we've developed called Zing, which allows you to combine different structured records within the same stream, and also our query language called Zeek, which is a very powerful, type-rich, and designed to deal with semi-structured data. We're also going to be using Zeek to enrich and contextualize the PCAP. You can roll your own, if you already have an existing deployment, but we also have it integrated into the Brim application. Zeek's a fantastic tool. It's not an intrusion detection protection system. If you haven't come across it before, it's a network security monitoring tool. And what it does, it takes network data and enriches it and contextualizes it and turns it into what it calls streams. So really looking at the protocols individually and also trying to identify protocol anomalies. Also keep the advisory handy. We're going to be using it to extract tactics, techniques, and procedures to form our threat hunting hypothesis, and it's a good read in any case. It's always worth keeping your malware knowledge up to date. So when we look at the advisory, a couple of things stick out which are going to help us to start making sense of our sample. First of all, victims are usually infected using a phishing email. It's either going to contain a macro-enabled malicious document that's going to download the malware, or it's going to contain a link to a compromised website which is hosting such a document. We also know that the malware can act as a dropper. It means it can download additional components and payloads. So that's something worth looking for. And we know that it has worming capabilities. It may try to infect other systems on the network that it's on. Command and control is executed using HTTP post requests, targeting port 80, 443, and also 8080. That last one, of course, is often a proxy port. And we know that command and control requests contain URIs with randomized alphanumerical named directories. So this is going to help us to start keeping our eyes open when we go through the data in a minute. CISA also released a lovely outline in 2018, just demonstrating how Emotet works. And you see very clearly, number one, there's that infection step where a phishing email is sent and the user's going to open up the document or follow the link, and the malicious macro will download the malware itself. The next step is that the malware is going to establish persistence. It's going to go into the registry, into the running processes to make sure that it can, survive a reboot and remain on the system. Then comes the instruction phase where it tries to connect to command and control, pick up any kind of instructions, and also see if there's any additional payloads to download. Identifying patient X. A good first step when trying to analyze malware is to look at the DNS activity within your network data. Now, typically malware is going to be relying on DNS for various functions, whether it's command and control for infection and also to download further payloads. So luckily, Zeek actually has a protocol analyzer which focuses on DNS, and we can directly invoke that. You can already see we get a lot of detail here. We have the actual source and destination IP addresses. We also have the source and destination ports. We can see the actual queries, and we can also see the response. Now, we have quite a lot of data here, and the more data you have, I'd say the more unwieldy this gets. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly use a Zeek query to actually do a count by the query and then to sort it so that we can stack it to see the outliers. Now, we can see a number of different, typical entries here, some Windows networking activity. We can also see some addresses which, look slightly less familiar. I mean, Microsoft looks legit, but my tip there would be, if it doesn't look familiar, validate it. If it does look familiar, check it twice. Some of these are just related to anti-spam and similar. So let's focus on the ones which don't look familiar. We have virus total lookup directly integrated into Brim. It's just a very simple right click, and immediately we can start looking into this. Okay, so we have a domain here which is known for phishing. That's interesting. And if we look a little bit further, we also have a domain, which has actually been hit by 6 engines. And when we look at the details, it's a known infection source, it's a compromised website. I think a good idea, because we have some last known DNS records here, is just to do a blind check and see if we see any other data relating to that. And indeed, we seem to have the same sample that virus total is aware of. And you can see here, this would be the compromised host that's doing the infecting. Our patient X looks to be 10.9.1.101. We have a number of other different logs here. We have a nice GET request here going to that domain that we identified earlier. It's going to a randomized lettered directory, and we can also see that a file has been downloaded. So it seems like our patient X has been identified. Now we can start looking a little bit further into what's happened. Identifying command and control. Now that we have a bit of a better overview of what's going on, let's look a little bit more into these suspicious looking connections, because something's going on there. Now, when you double click on an entry, what Brim can actually do is we can do an end-to-end visualization of the entire communication flow. We do this using the UID. Community ID is also coming, if you're into Suricata and Zeek correlation. But right now, let's look at the connection diagram. And immediately we see a number of different things stick out. Now, this is quite a long connection. We can see repeated, what looks like HTTP connections. But what sticks out to me are the DPD and weird streams. And these are generated by Zeek. DPD is the dynamic protocol decoder. So it's something which tries to identify specific network protocols and also anomalies within that. And weird generally identifies, I would say, a more broader set of anomalies. So let's look at these. When we click it, we pivot directly into it, and we can see straight away it says, not an HTTP request line. Okay, so it says it's doing HTTP, but it might not be. There's another one, bad HTTP request. We can see it's actually our victim X. It's 10.9.1.101. And we see it's going to port 8080, which, if you remember the advisory, that's one of the ports that Emotet uses. Bad HTTP request. And then lastly, line terminated with a single CR. So this seems to be the actual command and control traffic. I think the next thing that we're going to be looking at is we're going to take a look at what exactly happened from a file activity point of view. We can already see one binary has come down. Let's verify if anything else has happened there. Maybe a dropper has been downloaded, for example. So for that, what we're going to be using is another Zeek for Power query. We have this lovely file name, if not null, which really will show us any kind of record. And this is one of the beauties of Brim, and you can see this with the Zeek data. We can mix any type of record. You don't need to put it into a shared schema. It's all really embedded. It's something which Zeek does by default and which we've extended onto other data sources as well. But what it means is that we can do these very nice little queries where we say any field with file name, if it contains an entry, show it to me. Now, I've also done a little bit of additional on the back here. As you can see, I've added a cut because so we have this essentially this search pipeline where you can have a search term and then you can pipe it through aggregators and processors. And I'm just using the cut command so that I can extract the data that's useful for me. You can also use the column chooser for this if you want a more static view. That will actually be tied to the query directly. So whenever you put this same query in, you will get this view. But for the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to do this manually. Just to kind of show you what it would look like without. You can see we have a lot more fields here than we're actually going to require for our specific query right now. So if we look here, we have a number of different file activities. We can see that infection again, and it seems to be a one-off activity here. We don't see any other complete binaries. In fact, none of the other entries have a MIME type, which of course is interesting in and of itself. To me, they don't really look like complete connections. We can do a quick lookup just to see if this is a legitimate binary. There's no matches being found. So let's look a little bit into the binary that we do have, because of course we can see here an exe went through, and luckily due to the MD5 and SHA-1 processors built into Zeek, we can actually extract the checksum and do an immediate virus total lookup. It's good, then we don't have to hand over live malware at all. And we can already see here the number of different entries. It's being flagged as Emotet across the board. So we can be pretty sure that this was actually the malware coming down. My assumption would be that we're just seeing the tail end of the actual phishing attempt. This is already after the user has either clicked a link or an affected macro. Enumerating command and control. So now that we've identified one of these connections, let's have a look if we can actually find out a little bit more. Now we can see in the actual connection diagram that all of this begins with what essentially is a post request, HTTP post. So let's look into that. Let's have a look and see if we can actually find some more post requests in our data. And there we go. We actually see quite a number. And if we take a look along this, it does appear to be to a number of different source addresses. So I can identify 3 separate ones here. And indeed, they're all quite similar. We see a post request, and then we see these randomly generated directories in the URI. This one actually looks quite worrying. There's also an actual system identifier built into this. But all of these addresses now can go into our list of indicators of compromise. We can use these to conduct further hunting in other technologies or data sources that we may have. We can also put it onto our watch list to put it into deny rules on the firewall, on the WAF, and similar technologies. Now, this is a pretty rough view, and once again, we can also, of course, make this a little bit more targeted. So we can use a little bit more of a sophisticated SQL query. So in this case, we're going to be filtering on our victim X. We're going to be looking for the post method, and then we're going to trim it down just to the fields which are going to be relevant to us. So this is going to be a bit of a more smooth view. And indeed, we have an update coming soon where you're going to be able to actually save these into a library. One other thing which we can do, just to make sure that we're on the right track, of course, we can validate each one of these addresses. We can already see there's the first hit. It's also a known malicious site, and of course, I mean, we can already pretty much guess that we're going to get hits here, but it's still always just good to be sure. Evaluating the spread of infection. The last thing we want to do before we complete our investigation is just check if any other infection has occurred. If you recall from the advisory, Emotet is known to propagate to adjacent systems on the network and to try to compromise them too. Now for this, all I'm going to do is quickly stack all of the Zeek streams by count, and then we can already see what type of activity is in our data. And as you can already see, there doesn't seem to be any kind of SMB or DC RPC activity. It's all rather internet related. But let's just have another quick look just to make sure that we're not missing anything. And for this, we're going to go for something slightly different, and we're going to be using Brim's rich data typing. So you can already see here I'm using a CIDR notation. I'm going to be filtering on our victim X. And what I really want to see here is all of the different connections to any other hosts on the 10.0.0.0/.8 network. And if I look here, seems to be two main addresses, 1.255 or 1.1. Not untypically, the DNS servers might be addressed that way. And if we do have a quick look into here, we can do a new search with this value. Indeed, Zeek will have a corresponding con record for each DNS record. I mean, it seems to almost match up, and most of it seems to be DNS activity. So we don't see any propagation of the malware on the internal network. It doesn't mean to say none occurred. I think we have to keep that in mind. It just means we don't have any in our sample. Now that we've conducted our investigation, we can put all of our observed activity together. Initially, we saw that suspicious domain, t-privat.de, and when we dug a little bit further into that data, we saw a suspicious GET request. We then saw a binary come back. We verified the MD5 hash using VirusTotal and validated that it's also a malicious known binary. Next, we identified command and control traffic to port 8080, and we identified this using Zeek's DPD and weird streams. And lastly, we were able to identify further command and control traffic by searching for HTTP post against two other systems on port 443. We observed a number of different MITRE attack techniques, or rather, we can imply that we observed them. For example, we know that at some point there must have been a phishing email, even if we're only seeing the tail end of that. But we can see the user execution of the malicious link or the malicious file. And lastly, we also observed the tactic command and control over web protocols. Having conducted our investigation, we now have a list of indicators of compromise. We have a number of IP addresses related to the command and control. We also have our infection source, and we also have the file name and the associated hashes. Now, we can use these either to conduct further threat hunting on any other kind of data sources or technologies that we have. We can also add them to our watch list or machine-readable threat intelligence so that they can be also used in firewalls or web proxy filters and similar technologies that might be able to actually block the connection, shoot the node in the head, so to speak, before it can connect back out. Lastly, I want to thank you. Do try out Brim. It is simply the best solution to investigate and explore Zeek and security data, and it's free and it's open source. We have a thriving Slack community. And if you want a written reminder of what you learned in the video, do check out the accompanying blog. A lot of these commands are going to be captured there as well. So if you want to give them a go yourself, you're going to find it there.